Hey, you liberal fruitcakes. Regulations, economies, and trees. Let's talk about them. Now, I've had a couple of people ask me this question about, regulations and Trump's desire to lighten up some regulations, especially in the way of lumber production in the United States. And I've always been of the opinion that the regulatory agencies within the United States over-regulate businesses to the detriment of the United States economy. Now, I'm not saying regulations aren't good, quite the opposite. I've had the opportunity to talk with and discuss water conservation with farmers. And the regulations that have come down the line provided innovations within that industry to grow strong crops with less water. What an amazing thing! And that's an example of good regulation. But then you can look at regulations like what's been happening in California after the tragedy of the LA forest fires. Because of environmental concerns, LA County was preventing people from starting to recover on their own properties in way of debris collection and removal. We saw this on the news, and we saw the little spat between Trump and the mayor and how he said it makes no sense for people who have that property and their stuff is gone to not be able to just start removing the rubble. Because in LA County, there are certain permitting requirements, and people were ready to go, but they were being held up by these permitting requirements. That's a bad thing. That is over-regulating at the detriment to the American people. So now let's deep dive into these topics. The good things about regulation. It ensures safety, both for the people operating within a business and for the environment. It forces innovations, and it prevents monopolies. Now, the bad things with regulation, it increases the cost of goods and services. Now, I know what you're saying. How? Because when you go into compliance with the regulations, it's going to cost money, which increase the cost of goods because they have to pass that cost on somewhere. They can't just eat it. If you've never run a business, you cannot say, yes, they can. You don't know. Trust me. It reduces efficiency. Now, people would say, well, that doesn't make sense either. How could over-regulation or regulations decrease efficiency? Because suddenly, rather than the ethical things they were doing that worked for their company, they're being forced by governing bodies who do not understand how their markets work to jump through hoops that are unnecessary and don't often prevent the negative impacts they're trying to prevent. Job loss. Yes, overregulation can lead to job loss because it raises higher costs. Or it may push companies who are too small to compete with these higher costs to be in compliance with these regulations out of the market, creating monopolies and slower economic growth. There are many studies that you can look at that have shown that increased regulation has slowed economic growth. There's a correlation between the increased percentage of regulations to the loss in productivity. In 2013, the Mercatus Center showed that federal regulation decreased GDP growth by 0.8% year over year from 1949 to 2005. And yet we just continue to add on more regulations rather than streamlining what works and getting rid of the regulations that don't. So now we need to talk about trees real fast, because a lot of people are concerned that, Trump wants to open up foresting for trees in the United States to decrease lumber cost and bring lumber production back to the United States. And we are over-regulating the permits required for ethical deforestation and lumber production at the detriment to our economy. Now, I couldn't find accurate numbers on how many trees the United States removes every single year. But from what I could tell, it was 36 million in rural and urban areas, and 1.19 million in our natural forests, for a combined total of 37.19 million trees. Now, even with these numbers, I'm 100% in favor of opening up regulations to allow lumber production to happen in the United States. Why? Because the United States plants 1 billion trees across the country every single year. So that means we are net producing trees, and not by a small amount. So if you guys are concerned, I just want you to think that he is not trying to eliminate all regulations on environmental programs or issues. But we do need to deregulate, and he wants to deregulate the unnecessary regulations to benefit our economy. So deep breaths, because it's all going to be okay. Have a good day.